Most people do not notice how strange their inner life is until it begins to betray them. A habit refuses to stop. A relationship collapses in the same shape again. A dream lingers longer than the day that follows it. Something beneath the surface behaves with its own intention, as if the mind were not a single voice, but a crowded room. This is where the divide between Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud lives. Not in old books, but in the private moments when you can no longer explain yourself to yourself. When a human being suffers, what is moving underneath the pain? Is it buried desire, pressing upward through repression? Or is it something deeper than desire, something symbolic and half-forgotten, trying to become conscious through the cracks of ordinary life? Freud distrusted the polite surface of personality and believed civilization itself was built on renunciation. Beneath manners, morality, ambition, and romance, he saw instinct struggling in chains. Sexual drives, aggression, infantile wishes, humiliations too painful to admit. These were not side notes to life. They were the engine. The respectable self, in Freud's view, was often just a compromise between hunger and prohibition. That is why his work still feels subversive. He looked at the modern individual and removed the mask. "The ego is not master in its own house," he wrote, and the sentence still lands like a wound to human pride. What you call I may be little more than a negotiator, trying to keep order in a system it does not truly control. Jung began in Freud's shadow, but could not remain there. Freud saw in him an heir, perhaps even a son strong enough to carry psychoanalysis into the future. Their first conversations were electrifying, but deep alliances often conceal a deeper incompatibility. Freud wanted a science of hidden drives. Jung wanted a psychology large enough to include the soul. The break between them was not only intellectual, it was almost mythic. Father and son, law and rebellion, reduction and expansion. Freud wanted to explain the psyche without surrendering to mysticism. Jung kept moving toward a vision in which dreams, symbols, religion, and myth were not decorative illusions, but expressions of a deeper structure of the mind. If Freud was right, then many of your noblest motives may be disguises. Love may hide dependency. Morality may hide fear. Kindness may hide the wish to be approved. Your symptoms would then be coded messages from repressed instinct, and healing would require ruthless honesty. You would need to trace your suffering back to what was forbidden, shamed, or buried. Freud's genius was not that he made human beings look vulgar. It was that he understood how elegantly the mind lies. Repression does not erase desire. It teaches desire to wear costumes. A panic attack, an obsession, a dream. These might be the psyche speaking in disguise, because the truth is too dangerous to appear naked. But Jung noticed something Freud could not fully trust. People do not suffer only because they repress instinct. They also suffer because they lose contact with meaning. A person can satisfy desire and still feel empty. They can achieve status, marriage, wealth, and freedom and remain inwardly divided, haunted by dreams they do not understand and moods that feel older than biography. Jung heard not only the return of the repressed, but the call of the unrealized self. He believed the unconscious was not merely a basement of shameful impulses. It was also a symbolic world, alive with archetypes, neglected possibilities, and buried wisdom. In that view, the mind is not just a battlefield of drives. It is a living drama, and the parts of you that disturb your peace may also be the parts trying to save your life. This is why Jung's psychology feels dangerous in a different way. Freud humiliates the ego by revealing what it hides. Jung unsettles it by revealing how small it is. He suggests that your conscious identity, the persona you manage carefully, is only a fragment of the total psyche. Beneath it waits the shadow, everything you rejected in order to become acceptable. And the more innocent you try to appear, the darker that shadow tends to grow. Jung's warning was devastatingly clear. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The self you proudly display may not be your virtue at all. It may be the wall you built to avoid meeting what you envy, what you fear, what you secretly want, and what life has demanded from you, but your identity refuses to become. So who was right? The tempting answer is to treat them like rivals, as though one discovered the truth and the other wandered into metaphor. But the real tension is more intimate than that. Freud explains why your past still has claws in you. Jung explains why your future keeps appearing in symbols before you are ready to live it. Freud shows how repression creates neurosis. Jung shows how one-sided living creates emptiness. Freud asks what desire has been censored. Jung asks what part of the soul has been exiled. Between them stands the modern person, able to speak about trauma and still unable to answer one question. Why, despite knowing so much about yourself, do you still feel like a stranger in your own life? And perhaps that is where their conflict stops being historical and begins to feel uncomfortably close. Because the argument between Freud and Jung is not really between two dead men. It is between two explanations for the same ache inside you. One says you are divided because instinct was chained. The other says you are divided because the deeper self was never allowed to speak in its own language. One leads downward into repression, childhood, sexuality, guilt, and conflict. The other leads inward into myth, symbol, shadow, and individuation. The first asks what was done to you. The second asks what within you has not yet been born. And that is where the real verdict begins. Because once you enter that territory, you begin to see that Freud and Jung were not merely diagnosing pathology. They were each constructing a map of what it means to be human, and the difference between their maps changes everything. Freud looked at civilization and saw an elaborate arrangement for managing the dangerous truth of instinct. Beneath art, religion, etiquette, and even reason itself, he detected the ancient pressures of libido and aggression being redirected, softened, denied, or sublimated into forms society could tolerate. In his world, suffering is often the tax so we pay for becoming social creatures. The mind splits because it must. Desire wants one thing, conscience demands another, and the ego survives by negotiating a ceasefire it can never fully enforce. This is why Freud remains unsettlingly modern. He did not believe maturity meant purity. He believed maturity meant learning how much of yourself can never be made entirely innocent. Jung could not accept that the highest products of human life were merely transformed instinct. He sensed that something in the psyche was reaching not only backward toward childhood, but forward toward wholeness. This was the point at which their alliance began to collapse. Freud wanted explanations that moved from symptom to repression, from dream to wish, from conflict to its buried cause. Jung kept encountering images that seemed too large for private biography alone. Ancient symbols appearing in modern dreams, mythic patterns repeating across cultures, spiritual crises that looked less like illness than like unfinished transformation. To Freud, this drift threatened psychology with mystification. To Jung, Freud's model threatened to flatten the soul into mechanism. What Freud called illusion, Jung often treated as symbolic necessity. What Freud interpreted as disguised wish, Jung sometimes saw as a message from a deeper center of the psyche. And this is where the question becomes personal. If Freud is more right, then self-knowledge begins with suspicion. You must doubt your stated motives, distrust the stories you tell about your goodness, and examine the covert bargains hidden inside love, morality, ambition, and grief. Freud forces you to ask whether your virtues are clean or merely well-dressed compromises. When you become controlling, are you protecting order or defending against helplessness? When you become self-sacrificing, are you loving or are you securing your place in the hearts of others? Freud had little patience for the flattering fictions of self-image. "We are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love," he wrote. And in that sentence, you can hear his entire worldview. Attachment exposes dependency. Dependency awakens fear. And the civilized self is always more fragile than it wants to appear. But if Jung is more right, then suspicion alone will never save you. You can expose every childhood wound, identify every repression, and still remain profoundly incomplete. Because not all inner conflict is pathology. Some of it is the pain of becoming larger than the identity you have outgrown. Jung saw that many people are not only haunted by what they have suppressed, but starved by what they have refused to become. The obedient son who never developed aggression, the competent woman who buried her instinct and now cannot feel desire without guilt, the admired public self that grows stronger while the private soul becomes ghost-like. Jung understood that the persona can become a prison precisely because it is rewarded. The more the world applauds your mask, the harder it becomes to hear the neglected parts of yourself banging from below. This is why Jung's idea of the shadow remains so piercing. The shadow is not just the evil self, as people often simplistically imagine. It is the whole rejected region of the personality, including anger, envy, sexuality, selfishness, tenderness, creativity, vulnerability, and power. Whatever the conscious self cannot tolerate gets pushed into darkness. Then, instead of disappearing, it begins to return through projection. You condemn in others what you cannot bear in yourself. You fall in love with qualities you have abandoned. You are irrationally disturbed by people who embody your disowned life. Jung saw clearly that much of human conflict is not about reality at all, but about unconscious self-recognition. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, he wrote, and it is hard to think of a more uncomfortable truth for an age obsessed with blame. Freud, however, would not let us romanticize the unconscious. That is his enduring strength. Jung can sound liberating, but Freud reminds us that the psyche is not noble simply because it is deep. Human beings are capable of self-deception on a scale that makes spirituality itself into camouflage. Even the search for meaning can become a defense against desire. Even transcendence can hide vanity. Even morality can become aggression, purified into principle. Freud saw how quickly the mind recruits ideals to protect itself from truths it does not want to face. That is why reducing him to everything is sex misses the real force of his work. His deeper claim was that consciousness is not transparent to itself, and that the respectable surface of life is often stitched together over conflict, hunger, resentment, grief, and fear that remain active whether acknowledged or not. And yet Freud's brilliance leaves a residue of bleakness. If everything lofty is partly compensation, disguise, or sublimation, then the human spirit begins to feel permanently under suspicion. Jung rebelled against that narrowing, not because he was naive, but because he had looked into psychic darkness himself and found that breakdown can contain direction. He believed symptoms may express not only damage, but imbalance, not only distortion, but demand. He understood the terrifying possibility that depression, anxiety, or inner deadness may arise when the conscious personality has become too one-sided, too adapted, too false. In that sense, suffering is not always a malfunction. Sometimes, it is the psyche's refusal to let you continue living against your own structure. Jung's great question was not merely, "What happened to you?" but "What is trying to emerge through this crisis?" That question does not erase pain. It gives pain a different gravity. So who was right? The most honest answer is that each saw a truth the other could not fully contain. Freud grasped the humiliating power of repression, infantile desire, ambivalence, and the endless cunning of defense. Jung grasped the symbolic depth of the unconscious, the reality of inner multiplicity, and the necessity of integrating what the ego excludes. Freud teaches you to dig through illusion. Jung teaches you to listen to what appears once illusion cracks. Freud is indispensable when the self is lying. Jung is indispensable when the self is lost. One helps explain why we repeat. The other helps explain why repetition becomes unbearable. One reveals the chains forged by the past. The other reveals the shape of the unlived life waiting behind them. Perhaps the real mistake is wanting a winner at all, because the psyche itself refuses such simplicity. There are days when you are Freudian without knowing it, driven by old wounds disguised as present choices, compelled by needs you would rather rename. And there are days when you are unmistakably Jungian, standing in a life that looks successful from the outside, while something ancient and wordless inside you begins to revolt. You do not have one mind. You have layers, conflicts, masks, inheritances, fantasies, and unfinished possibilities. You are repression and symbol, instinct and image, memory and myth. The argument between Freud and Jung survives because human beings contain evidence for both. And maybe that is why their split still matters so much. Not because history failed to settle it, but because every serious life eventually reenacts it. There comes a point when you must ask whether your suffering is the return of what was buried, or the protest of what was never allowed to live. Whether your exhaustion comes from repressed desire, or from decades spent serving a persona that no longer fits your soul. Whether the disturbing dream is a disguised wish, or a message from the deeper architecture of your becoming. There is no final comfort in that uncertainty, only a more demanding form of honesty. Because the mind is not a courtroom where one theory wins and the rest are dismissed. It is a dark interior country, and the longer you live, the more you realize that both men were standing at its edges, describing different lights, different dangers, different doors. In the end, the most unsettling possibility is not that Freud was right, or that Jung was right. It is that your life may already reveal which one you have been ignoring. Somewhere in you, a hidden conflict is still rehearsing its old pain, and somewhere else, a buried self is still waiting for its hour. One keeps repeating what you have not faced. The other keeps sending symbols from what you have not become. And if you listen carefully enough, beneath the noise of your explanations, beneath the polished story of who you think you are, you may hear the quietest and most frightening truth of all. The deepest part of you has been speaking for years, and the question was never who was right about the mind. The question was whether you were willing to hear what your own mind has been trying to say before it is forced to say it through ruin. Thank you for being part of Intelligence Wisdom. If something here stayed with you, don't ignore it. Sit with it. And if you want to keep exploring the deeper layers of the mind, consider subscribing.